You're tuned to Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay. This is the program called Acupuncture on Air, and it's our pleasure, as always, to have in the studio, in the hot seat, Heiko, fresh from his trip to China. How you going, Heiko?
I'm really good, Ken. You should have to come to China with us one day. You haven't been there yet, have you?
I haven't been to China, and I bet it's fascinating.
Yeah, and particularly we're only at Beijing for this trip, and it was sort of like a part like Tai Chi symposium, but also visits to the hospital. It was eight of us acupuncturists all went together.
What was the highlight of the trip for you?
Oh, I don't think there was any really highlight. Every day was something good, but probably I think for most of the others who hadn't been there was the trip to the Great Wall, and then doing the Tai Chi, on the Great Wall.
Yeah, and you were saying that the weather was awesome, fabulous.
Yeah, it was 37 degrees, blue sky, not a cloud in the sky. You hear all these things about Beijing and the pollution, you can't see across the road, but yeah, you would not have known it there.
Right. But you've come back with a cold.
Well, I think it's just coming back on the plane with that sort of the dryness of the aircon and everything like that, so just a little bit of a bit croaky there, not actually having a cold, but just sort of feeling a bit sort of dried out.
Anyway, today we're going to talk about the spleen, but before we get there, just remind our listeners, we want to come and see you for some acupuncture, some Chinese herbs, some moxibustion. I haven't spoken about moxibustion for ages. Or cupping.
Cupping, yeah.
Where are you?
And I'm in 206 Charles Street, Hastings. And then my colleague John, he has his clinic down in Marsden at 49 Church Street.
Yes, indeed. And you open 5.5 days a week in Hastings?
Pretty well, 5.5 days a week. And if you want to come, I'll even treat you on Sunday morning.
Would you really? Because I'm a special guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, tell us about the spleen, because apparently the traditional Chinese spleen is different to the modern day spleen. How can that be?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting thing, but first let me mention something about the spleen. The Chinese medicine practitioners, or the real traditional authors, we're talking back sort of 200 BC or whatever, they'd already been writing about the spleen back then and its various functions and its diseases that it can cause. Whereas in Western medicine, the spleen didn't really get mentioned until much later, till sort of maybe sort of 500, 600 AD. So, you're talking that the Chinese did have a bit of a precursor to it. So, and then in regards to that, I think it was about 200 AD, there's a famous Chinese physician who actually did a dissection of the spleen. He also did a splenectomy where he took the spleen out of the patient.
So they actually did surgery back then?
They even did surgery, and because people forget that morphine, which is sort of a modern drug, if you like, it comes from a Chinese herb, and they actually had Chinese herbal formulas that sort of knocked you out so that the patient could have surgery.
Amazing. So they had so the spleen comes out, but it's one of those organs that you can live without, like the appendix. I mean, how does Chinese medicine look at the spleen differently from what we do?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can live without the physical spleen in terms of Western medicine. We know that. But Chinese medicine looks at it's not just the spleen, but it's also then the spleen meridian, which is sort of the connection, the railway track, if you like, that then connects the stomach to the spleen and then back to the heart. So there's, even though the spleen itself might be removed, the sort of the function of the spleen still can keep going.
Did we actually discuss what the spleen does? What does the spleen do?
Well, from a Western medical point of view, it has a relationship with the blood. It actually sort of stores red blood cells and makes red blood cells. And it's fundamentally an organ it's to do with sort of strengthening immunity and protecting you against infection. And this is not completely different towards the traditional Chinese point of view, because Chinese medicine always says that you have to have a strong spleen, to protect yourself against colds and flu and energy and getting weak. It's just that the Western science view has got broken it down to a very, very cellular level, whereas the traditional Chinese way, it's of a much more broader general nature, if you like.
So if you have your spleen taken out, you're more prone to getting stuff like you've got colds and flus and all that sort of stuff?
Look, to be honest, I'm not sure if that is the case. It's certain. It's like people have their appendix out, and they still lead ordinary life. But I think it certainly would, you'd rather have it than not have it.
Now, no doubt, as with all things Chinese, the spleen does many things.
That's right, and this is where the difference between the traditional concept of the spleen and then the modern spleen. one aspect is that the traditional point of view, we say the spleen controls a certain aspect of the mind, and we say it's to do with thinking, or what we call pensiveness, which is like too much thinking. And we say the spleen is responsible for the ability to focus, to study, to concentrate, to memorize while you're reading and studying. And of course, the Western medicine has no connection with that at all, and they say, look, that's all just to do with the brain and that's it. Whereas the Chinese medicine will say, yeah, that the spleen is involved in that aspect. And I suspect that somehow the spleen, in some way with its relationship with the red blood cells, affects that part of the brain. And so that we can look at it that, for example, if you're placed into a situation like my daughter now at uni, she's been forced, she has to do so much extra study. She's got to be focusing to remember things for exams, being at first year uni, competing, stressing out, all that, like with all the other uni kids. This all will weaken the spleen, and then they start to get other spleen type symptoms. The other way around it is that, like you, for example, might have worked really hard, long hours, and then damaged your spleen, and then you start to comment, I just can't concentrate and focus like I used to. I used to be able to really just get in there and read a book, and now it's like I'm all fuzzy and all over the place because the spleen is weak. So it works, it's like a double-edged sword, and sometimes you have to work out what has caused it and then hence how to fix it.
So I suppose all the students listening to this, because when I was a student, I just I couldn't concentrate. So let's presume going back then that I might have had a weak spleen, must still have it, because I find it hard to, if I tried to memorise that page, there's just no way I could do that. So no doubt students will be lining up saying, come and help me, Heiko, because I've obviously got a weak spleen because I can't remember anything. What's the treatment for them, and what do you do?
Yeah, again, when we have specific acupuncture points that sort of have the traditional classic function to treat difficulty to concentrate, difficulty to memorise, clear thinking, and many patients, they talk about sort of foggy thinking. They say that their mind actually feels like it's full of cotton wool and it's hard to to think clearly. These are all very much spleen deficient signs, and so we have different acupuncture points that we can use for that.
Where are those points?
Well, one of them, a common one is that we use a lot. It's just below the knee, and again we can use that one with moxa as well, and it has that reputation to strengthen the body and to then improve the thinking, the concentration, the memory, everything.
Sounds too good to be true, Heiko.
Yeah, it's too good to be true. Yeah, as we know, acupuncture can treat everything.
What about Chinese herbs? Can you could we come and say, give me some?
Yeah, there are many sort of different types of Chinese herbs that are used, and commonly speaking, from the traditional point of view, we look at either the spleen or the kidneys are the main two organs that need constant work and improvement, whereas Western medicine, everything is focused more on the heart and to do with cholesterol and blood vessels and things like that. And so we have different types of herbs. One of them is, like, say, a Chinese yam, lotus seeds, ginseng is a common. All these ones are they're tonics, for the spleen. We want to improve your ability to process the foods that you eat that are taken into the stomach, and then that then sends the energy to where it needs to go, including the mind, including the muscles and so forth.
Now, you mentioned that the spleen is highly involved with making the blood. So is that something to do with anemia as well?
It can be. Sometimes, like if a patient just comes in with anemia, the Western medicine approach is, well, look, the iron levels really don't. Man, you've got to take this iron, and then some people, they have problems with it. They cause constipation, or they're not really, and then they take it and they're good for a short time, and then they're deficient again, because then you need to look at the mechanism of what's causing that deficiency. And that may be it may be the spleen, it may be something else, but certainly if it's the spleen, then it's that underlying mechanism that to make the blood, so that then you don't suffer from the anemia and the blood deficiency.
You mentioned a lack of iron, and a lot of people, of course, revert to supplements. Why wouldn't I just go and have a big fat steak?
Look, I mean, that can help. I mean, and sometimes the dietary thing is just anything, but sometimes I think people can be so deficient. You probably have to eat half a cow or something to, to try to get that iron back.
Yeah. Tell us about palpitations, though.
Yeah, well, with the spleen, there's a number of different signs and symptoms that can come up, and one of them is palpitations. And it's simply because if there's not enough blood being made by the spleen to nourish the whole body, including the heart, then the heart will flutter. Another example is that if the spleen is weak and it's not nourishing the mind with its blood, then you can get stressed, or you might get insomnia. And then another aspect, we say the spleen controls the flesh or the muscles. And this is why sometimes if you've had a stroke and then the muscles have been affected, we use the spleen. And there's one herb in particular that's commonly used for rehabilitation in strokes. It's called astragalus, is its Western name. Wang Qi in its Chinese name. And so that herb is then used in large doses to rebuild the muscle.
Does it work?
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you look at the stats in the hospitals in China for stroke recovery, I mean, they're much faster than what you have here in the West.
So someone, for instance, who has, there are small strokes and there are major strokes.
Yeah.
Is it important to get onto the treatment more or less straight away? Or?
Yeah, because otherwise the things we say that everything will get stuck.
Yeah.
So that if you think you've had a stroke, and then I think if you've still got the inability to straighten out the arm, say after 1 year or 2 years, then it becomes very, very difficult. Because if you can imagine it, it's like everything's become rusty and dry and set in its ways. So that's why it's the important thing is just to start the treatment as soon as possible, and that's what they do in China. Literally within 3 to 4 days of having the stroke,
they're onto it.
Then they start with it.
Do they use that in conjunction with what we call traditional Western medicine, or do they exclusively treat things like strokes?
It's a combination. When we know, like if in China you had a stroke, of course, then you rush to hospital and they'll do all your scans, check everything. You might have super high blood pressure, or the blood's coagulating, so you put on blood thinners and blood pressure medication, and once all that is sort of under control and you're over the danger period, then they will start using acupuncture and herbs for the rehabilitation process. Whereas in the West it's a bit more like you'll have physiotherapy, do some exercises, do some stretching, or occupational, to learn how to be in a chair or how to walk with a cane, whereas the traditional way, Chinese medicine way, is to actually to recover from the whole injury, if you like, or the disease.
Okay, so we've got acupuncture in the knee, we've got Chinese herbs. What about moxibustion?
Again, moxibustion is an important thing, because moxibustion is strengthening and tonifying and supplementing. And so that we can, when the spleen is weak, we need it to be nourished, it needs to be tonified. So again, it might be that point below the knee that we use. There's other points on the abdomen that are for the spleen, on the back. There's many points that we can use the moxibustion for.
Do people actually come to you and say, I'm having a problem remembering or focusing or concentrating, and you say, that's your spleen? Or do you pick it up when they come to visit you for other things?
I would say most people sort of would think a problem with concentration or memory is just something you're born with, or something you have. But patients will come to you and say, I'm tired. And that seems to be sort of the first and foremost symptom. And then I go, and what do you like with concentration and focus? Oh, well, I can't do that because I'm tired. But then from our diagnostic perspective, all those symptoms are tied together into one sort of package, which is commonly is the spleen. Tiredness, lack of concentration, difficult to study and memorise. So and spleen. Then they're pale, and they don't digest their food properly. They might have a bit of loose stools, a bit of bloated stomach. It's sort of this whole part of this package, if you like.
And tiredness is a great segue into our song that we're going to have. That's
right, to finish off, because I just want to point out that, one of the key symptoms, or common symptom in the West, is tiredness. And I think that's why we have such a supplement, craze, and everyone sort of wants a supplement to not feel tired. But Chinese medicine-wise, the spleen is deficient, and the song that we've chosen is "I'm So Tired" from the Beatles.
And it's from their 1968 White Album. We call it the White Album. It's actually called the Beatles.
Beatles, yeah.
And written by John Lennon. And he wrote the song when he couldn't sleep. And at the time, he was plagued by insomnia. He should have come to see you, Heiko.
That's right. I can't understand why I didn't do that.
And the song detailed his very fragile state of mind at that time.
And here it is.
Just remind the listeners before we put it on, though, where are you?
206 Charles Street in Hastings. My website, acu123.co.nz.
Good on you, Heiko. As always, a pleasure. Look after yourself. Talk to the same time, same place next week.
Okay.